Congratulations, graduates. You're all over the place, but congratulations. Yeah. We did it. Was there ever a doubt that this day would come? And it's okay to say yes, because I had been there sometimes. Some of us struggled, right, more than others to get to this milestone in life, whether it be high school or undergraduate or your master's degree or a doctorate or trade school. I think those of us that have left that far behind, we can all remember the hard work. I think I speak on behalf of our pastor team here at Wellspring that what is really important is being able to look back and reflect upon the encounters and the experiences, the good, the bad, and the unknowns, and take with you the lessons that you've learned that have grown you and will continue to shape you, because life nor growth stops here. In fact, there's always a new beginning after something comes to an end in our lives, be it graduation or a job or a relationship, retirement maybe, or an illness that maybe changes us and leaves us less able, or leaving a church even. Endings are inevitable, aren't they? We're constantly being challenged to grow, and oftentimes that means going through hard stuff first. I have a vivid memory of being a senior in high school. I'm going to go way back. A time when you're thinking about college and what you're going to major in. And for as long as I can remember growing up, I desperately wanted to become a doctor to help people. And I had spent a lot of my high school years, from the time I was, they allowed it, volunteering at the hospital and racking up hundreds of hours. I loved being there. But it was the science classes, it was chemistry in particular, that became really the death of me. It was not a class that I excelled in. And I remember one day sitting outside Old School Hall on the steps with a professor talking about my dreams and my goals when I told him I wanted to go into medicine. And he said point blank, "You're never going to make it into med school with your performance in science. You should consider another career path." So talk about derailing my hopes and my dreams. I still wanted to try, but now I had more doubts than determination. Wouldn't a deep desire to help people count for something? So when I did get to college and had to take a few prerequisite science courses, I finally conceded that I was supposed to take a different path. And becoming a Christian that same year was probably really helpful in accepting the hard news, because my faith was so new and so large at the time. Yet that conversation with my high school teacher stuck with me over the years. It gave me a more profound sense of insecurity and inadequacy in my core. And about 5 years ago, because I still remember this story so well, I shared it with my son, and I was stunned at his response. He seemed frustrated and annoyed, quite understandably, at the professor, but also with me. In responding to my teacher's words, "You're never going to make it," my son asked me, "Why did you listen to him, Mom?" What a bleep bleep. Wanted to make it authentic. And I realized then how much power I had given to this one professor, who I'm sure never even realized how much his words had impacted me. So today we're going to look at a story of a young man who was also told he could not defeat something larger than him, who had to make a decision that could cost the whole United Nation of Israel. And I've taught some of you who graduated today this story in Sunday school when you were children and youth, and most of you probably already know the story of David and Goliath. And the story has a multitude of lessons, so there's so many we could pull out of it. Trusting God when you're faced with fear, following God's way, looking at what bad leadership looks like, trusting your abilities, being courageous. Those are just a few. Today's focus, though, is on how to face the fears or the Goliaths in your life. Because whether we admit it or not, every single person on this earth has fear of something. And we are all fallen human beings constantly battling the cosmic forces around us that want to steal, kill, destroy, oppress, distract, and direct us away from listening and seeing and believing that God is always at work for good. The text today comes from 1 Samuel 17, and I had Jonathan read that at the very last minute, so thank you for stepping up. And it's long, right? It's really long. So it's even longer than what we read. So I cut and pasted different portions from it. But I want to give you some historical context of why this duel between David and Goliath. I think when the kids were younger, we kind of just put them out there and said they had to fight each other, right? So David and Goliath are your main characters, and these are some key differences that I've listed between the two of them. David, who is the smaller person, was the son of Jesse, and he was an Israelite from Bethlehem. And then you have Goliath, who is huge, from Gath, and he was a Philistine. And they, basically, those two tribes were enemies. And the Israelites, of course, worshipped our one true God. The Philistines, however, worshipped several gods. And they were seen as very powerful, and they were often in conflict with the Israelites. Look at Goliath's stature. Physically, he is a man of huge stature. And when we convert their description of 6 cubits and a span tall, Goliath was estimated to be at least 8 feet tall, and he wore armor that weighed about 200 pounds, which is quite a lot. And on the other hand, you have David, who was tending sheep as a shepherd, and he wore no armor when they battled, and he was equipped with only a slingshot and 5 stones that he had gathered from a river nearby. And I have just a slide to show you what that probably would have looked like. I always want to think it's the one with the stick, and some show him with a bow and arrow, but this is, I think, a little more accurate. David defeats Goliath against all odds, but this story also gives us the tools that David himself drew upon to face Goliath, tools that will help us face whatever Goliath that you encounter in real time, real life. So you might be remembering this story, you might have a lot of questions just from what was read, like, wasn't there anyone else that could fight Goliath? Or David seems a little too self-confident. That's kind of actually what I thought initially reading this. And what were they fighting about anyway? Well, biblical history tells us that for a time, God allowed the people to select their kings that were going to rule, to enforce the laws that God had set forth and stated in the Torah. And Saul became the very first king, but he didn't adhere faithfully to the laws. Instead, he was motivated by power and success, and he chose to turn away from trusting God. Some of his prideful decisions led to war, including this particular battle that King Saul finds himself at against the Philistines. So this diagram is just kind of showing you so you can get an idea, so you can picture it better. This is what it looked like on the day of the battle. The red line represents the Philistines who were poised for battle, and the blue line are the Israelites that were with King Saul. And in between these two arcs is the valley of Elah, where David and Goliath battled it out. And the two armies had been positioned along those mountains for 40 days, and each day Goliath would come out and taunt and dare the army to send out one man to fight him. The losing army of the battle would then have to become servant to the victors. King Saul was likely the best candidate because he actually was quite tall. But even he feared for his life against Goliath. So then enter unassuming David, right? The shepherd. So early in the morning, David left the sheep with another shepherd, and he took the food and left as Jesse, his father, had told him. And when David arrived at the camp, the army was leaving. They were going out to their battle positions. The soldiers were shouting their war cry. The Israelites and the Philistines were lining up their men to face each other in battle. David left the food with the man who kept the supplies, and then he ran out to the battle line and talked to his brothers. While he was talking with them, Goliath came out. He was the Philistine champion from Gath. He shouted things against Israel as usual, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw Goliath, they were very much afraid and ran away. David's only assignment, according to his dad, right, and who instructed him, take food to the camp and check on your brothers. But when David arrives at the camp, the soldiers are preparing for battle, and while we don't know if David could see Goliath, he definitely heard Goliath shouting out things against Israel, and he saw the Israelites respond by running away, very much afraid. There's nothing in this passage that alludes to David intending to fight Goliath until this moment, when he becomes aware of what is going on. What is really at stake here? David is paying attention and listening. David teaches us that fighting our Goliath God's way requires us to be aware. That's number one in your notes. Be aware. Aware that he is in a war zone that he shouldn't be at all. Aware that Saul and his men are fearful because they don't trust God to protect and deliver them. Aware of the history between the Philistines and Israel. Aware that as he runs out to the front line, he is not armed or wearing any kind of armor to protect himself. Yet David's life was about to change as something is stirring in him through his awareness and presence before his God. There's so many times when I have been resistant to facing something or someone. I am painfully aware of my fear, which is a powerful driving force, and it makes me less aware sometimes of what I'm hearing, or what I'm thinking, or what I'm saying, or I'm doing. That is until I can pause to give my feelings of inadequacy and my lack of control over a situation to God, who is always paying attention and aware of us, who is simply waiting for us to invite him into our darkness and unknown. If David was afraid, we really don't pick up on that, but we do get that David is aware of everyone else's fear of Goliath. We see a young man who is confident in his abilities to face the fear of not just one, but a whole army and a king. David's faith in God even empowers him to stand up to his older brother for justice's sake. David is aware of what's at stake and is convinced that God is the powerhouse behind his ability to act and to help others who are fearful and lost. In the interest of time, I'm going to paraphrase verses 32 through 37, where David convinces Saul. He actually goes to Saul to let him fight Goliath because he has stood against the armies of the living God. Assuredly, David declares that the Lord will save him, David, from Goliath, just as he saved him from the lion and a bear that David killed with his own 2 hands when he was tending to Jesse's flock of sheep. Eventually, mostly because I think Saul himself is too afraid to fight, he lets David get in the ring with Goliath. But more obvious was that David revealed himself as a man with faith in God that Saul knew he himself didn't have. David was able to face Goliath God's way because he believed, and that's number 2. Believe. I'm going to make that present tense. Believe. And when David was face to face with Goliath, the Bible says Goliath looked down at David with disgust, especially because David had chosen a slingshot and 5 stones with no armor to fight, likely insulting Goliath even more, right? You're going to take me down with that? He curses David using his God's names. And as he taunts David, David responds in verse 45, "You come to me using a sword, a large spear, and a small spear. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. He's the God of the armies of Israel. You have spoken out against him. Today the Lord will give you to me. I'll kill you and I'll cut off your head. Today I'll feed the bodies of the Philistine soldiers to the birds of the air and the wild animals. Then all the world will know there is a God in Israel. Everyone gathered here will know the Lord does not need swords or spears to save people. The battle belongs to him, and he will help us defeat all of you." David believed in his God who would save and protect and empower him to be brave enough to take on Goliath, just as he protected his father's sheep from both a lion and a bear, and just as God protects us, his own flock. And finally, let's get to the battle in verse 48. I know some of you like some of this, more exciting. I call it, what do I call it, Nathan? My shoot 'em up, bang, bang moments. That's Nathan always has to have that. So, verse 48. As Goliath came near to attack him, David ran quickly to meet him. He took a stone from his pouch, he put it in his sling, and he slung it. And the stone hit the Philistine on his forehead and sank into it. Goliath fell face down on the ground. So David defeated the Philistine with only a sling and a stone. He hit him and killed him. He did not even have a sword in his hand. Talk about courageous. And I'm having a hard time as I read this, still with believing that the slingshot, one stone could take out this giant man, right? So I believe the power of God was at work, had to be, because David believed and he stepped up, and God made it happen. Confronting our Goliath requires, number 3, that we be brave. We be brave. Like many of the graduates that we celebrate this year, I think you all know you have worked really hard to get where you're at. I have worked really hard to finish 4 years of seminary with the love and encouragement of all of you, and leaning into my own faith in God, who at times had to push and lift and sometimes even carry me through from semester to semester. In my first year of seminary, I took a theology class with Professor Armida Belmonte Stevens, who I was intimidated by, to say the very least. Theology is hard in general, right? It's a hard class. Amidst the confusion of grasping Christian scholars and theologians' teachings, she would expect us to participate in class and to come prepared. That sounds funny because that's not a lot to ask of a student, right? It's really not. But when it's a really hard class, sometimes it is, right? So I would be afraid of saying something wrong, and I'd have knots in my stomach. And we had to do this on Zoom because we were still kind of in the COVID mode and long distance. And my heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest, and I would be praying, "Please, God, don't make her call on me." But I was grateful that really early on in the semester, as she laid out her expectations for us, she talked about people desiring a safe space, and said that people like that because that encourages us to be vulnerable enough to share and to be present. But her preference, rather than using the word safe space, was to rename it a brave space, which invited a person to take the initiative to speak and to learn, to even be wrong, in the hopes of growing and learning and becoming better. Safe space means that I don't have to act until the situation really changes for me. Brave space means I have agency to act and to risk, of course, as led by God. Brave space gets us to a place where we step out in faith with enough certainty that God has got us. This idea of being brave, carving out brave space, was a pivotal life lesson for me that shaped much of my 4 years in seminary, that changed the trajectory of my relationships, of my learning, and of my future. David was undoubtedly brave. Another thing about brave space is that it invites you. It invites you to be yourself as you put yourself out there in the world. When Saul agreed to David fighting Goliath in verse 38, it says he put his own clothes, right, on David. He put a bronze helmet on David's head, armor on his body. David put on Saul's sword, and he tried to walk around. But he was not used to all the armor that Saul had put on him. He said to Saul, I can't go in like this. I can't. I'm not used to it. And so then David took it all off. Right? And he got his stick in his hand and he chose 5 smooth stones, and you know how it ended. David knew himself enough to know what would help him to be at his best for God. Last point, the way to face our Goliath is number 4, to be you. Be you. I had people tell me this even before seminary, and it's been like, yeah, I treasure those words. Don't be like someone else. You don't have to be, but be you. Wonderful, unique, quirky, funny, cautious, caring, quiet, energetic, introverted, whatever you. Take the time to know and understand yourself and appreciate your unique qualities and identify what areas you still need to grow in. It is a lifelong process. David seemed to know himself well, as young as he was. He certainly didn't seem to struggle with a lack of confidence. In fact, quite the opposite. But his confidence came not from him, but his deep trust and belief in a God who is his creator and his redeemer, a God who formed David in his mother's womb and would later redeem him in life when he fell hard after becoming king himself. Can you trust God the way that David did? If not, what is the Goliath that you need to face? Maybe it's something physical or emotional that requires a doctor, a therapist, a pastor, or talking to another trusted someone, your parents. Perhaps it's a life change, going into a new venture. It could be college, a job, retirement, a new Bible study group, and you're not quite sure. Perhaps it's all kinds of feelings: inadequacy, loneliness, criticism, pride. Just as God equipped David, he is waiting to equip each one of us to help us face our fears, our own Goliath. All this from a God who never gives up on us. I wondered what it would feel like after I finished seminary to graduate. I figured there'd be more free time, but not quite yet because I had to prep for today's sermon. I know, yeah. I know that going through seminary helped me face my inadequacies and my insecurities from way back in high school, equipping me to be aware and to believe, to be brave and to be me. Trusting the journey and trusting God were critical to my staying the course and eventually stepping out into brave space as authentic and vulnerable me. Facing inadequacies meant being aware and learning to be part of a mosaic of people hearing their stories, learning about oppression and injustices in their ethnic history, and simply giving up to God those moments when I felt beaten down and tired. Being brave meant approaching my professors and admitting I didn't know where to start or understand what Augustine was trying to say. Being me meant pouring into an ongoing history project close to my heart that involved traveling to Alaska to meet and gather the stories of Alaska Natives for something good. I don't know what yet, but it's something good in the future. It meant being comfortable enough in my skin. For the first time, being the minority amongst the minorities, the only Asian woman in this year's North Park Seminary graduating class, it meant believing that God had put me in this particular place and space and time, finishing up a master's degree at 60 years old when everyone else was a lot younger than me. Their brains were a lot younger than me. It worked much better. And one thing I haven't mentioned, because in David's case it wasn't as evident, was that facing your Goliaths would come a bit easier if shared with trusted support. It didn't appear that David had the support of his family, nor of Saul and his army, really, but God was more than enough for David. With my dad passing away last September, I had gotten behind with the curriculum for seminary, and I was resigned to waiting another year to graduate. And I have a photo of these two women professors. And these are two of my professors who are amazing. One is on the left, Dr. Belmonte Stevens, who talked about brave space. The other was my professor for 2 history classes, Dr. Hannah Andre, who also was one of my toughest professors and the biggest support system to me in seminary. Her classes were hard. I tried to volunteer early on so I wouldn't get called on for the hard questions. And when I shared with her how vulnerable I felt in participating in our history class, she was very understanding, and she reassured me that she didn't think I sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about. And when I wanted to shape the Alaska Native Oral History Project but had no idea where to start, she helped facilitate the initial meeting with our ECC superintendent of the Alaska Conference, Curtis Ivanov, and from there it just took off. She initiated strategizing with me so I could finish all my classes to graduate with my cohort because it would be most meaningful. Most impactful, however, was that she was instrumental in helping me to overcome the Goliath of insecurity and inadequacy that I had carried over the years from high school and college and law school and with my master's degrees, simply by responding with God's care for my soul. If you want to experience understanding in pastoral professors, I tell you, go to seminary. It was a grueling final semester, but with her help and my cohort's help, all of you, my church, Ohana, and my family, Goliath was no match in the end. And so this was graduation last week. And so as I conclude, I'm going to put on my anti-pastor Cheryl hat when I say to our graduates, especially our younger ones, as you go on your new adventures, make sure in your own special way that you give thanks to and for all those who have supported you in all the years that you've been doing school. Because I am sure there were just as many prayers and sleepless nights as there was joy in celebrating each achievement along the way of your school journey. And friends, will you take some time this week to think about what in your life is your Goliath? What areas might require more work to help you build up the faith of David? When David picked up his slingshot to confront Goliath, it symbolized his faith in God and his awareness, his belief his bravery, and his true self. Will you pick up your slingshot and face your Goliath? Let's pray. Lord, you see us, you know us, and all of our fears that sometimes prevent us from being able to live into all that you want for us. And we ask that through David's example, you would help us to confront our own Goliaths, to be aware, to believe, to be brave, and to be the person you created each of us to be. May we be open to growth and transformation in whatever stage of life we are in and what lies before us. You are a holy God who seeks to make us whole. We desire that in you, O God. Thank you for loving us so well. Amen.